spent the first part of this week trying to figure out what I was preaching about today. Then I thought I had it figured out, and the hurricane came through, and I started trying to refigure what I was going to preach about. And I wanted to do something upbeat and cheerful, and my thought was get minds away from all of the stuff that's going on or has been going on with the storm. And it seemed like every time I turned around, God was pointing me back to something different. In the back of my mind, as he kept pointing me this way, and part of what maybe was trying to steer me away from it was remembering a series I had done a year or so ago, dealing with storms of life. And by the time I got to that end of that series, David had told me that he didn't want to hear about storms for a while again. So I may be a little leery about this morning, but it seemed like God kept reminding me of statements that I have made a lot of different times in my life, and that is that when these troublesome times come, one of two things happen. We either grow stronger in our faith and we grow closer to God, or these moments lead us towards destruction. They tear us apart, and they tear apart our families and our lives, and if we're not careful, we can allow them to do even more damage than what happened physically around us, even with a devastating physical storm like what we had to go through. And so as God kind of kept bringing that back to my mind, and then I heard the song again this week. I hadn't heard it in a while. The song by Casting Crowns, I put the lyrics on the front of the bulletin this morning. Their song, Praise You in the Storm. And I want to take just a moment to read those lyrics before we dive into Scripture and all this morning. But the lyrics of this song are one that were written as the artist got to know one of their young fans who had been diagnosed with cancer, and they got close to the family, and they witnessed that family's walk with their young daughter who ultimately died from that cancer, the walk that they had with their daughter and with God through the midst of that storm. And so as we talk about this morning, these different struggles and all that, we're talking about more than just a hurricane that went through. We're talking about all the different struggles that we face. But here's the lyrics that were written about that situation. I was sure by now, God, you would have reached down and wiped our tears away, stepped in and saved the day. And once again, I say amen, and it's still raining. But as the thunder rolls, I barely hear your whisper through the rain. I'm with you. And as your mercy falls, I'll raise my hands and praise the God who gives and takes away. And I'll praise you in the storm, and I will lift my hands. For you are who you are, no matter where I am. Every tear I've cried, you hold in your hand. You never left my side. And though my heart is torn, I will praise you in the storm. I remember when I stumbled in the wind, you heard my cry. You raised me up again. But my strength is almost gone. How can I carry on if I can't find you? But as the thunder rolls, I barely hear your whisper through the rain. I'm with you. And as your mercy falls, I'll raise my hands and praise the God who gives and takes away. And I'll praise you in this storm, and I will lift my hands, for you are who you are, no matter where I am. In every tear I've cried, you hold in your hand. You've never left my side. And though my heart is torn, I will praise you in the storm. I lift my eyes into the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I lift my eyes into the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And I will praise you in this storm. And I will lift my hands, for you are who you are. And no matter where I am, every tear I've cried, you hold in your hands. You've never left my side. And though my heart is torn, I will praise you in this storm. Our difficulties come in so many different forms, so many different degrees of difficulty. From the hurricane, the damage, some who have had pretty severe damage to their house, to others that just minor things, inconveniences, the power outages, and that sort of thing. To those that are battling cancer, those that are dealing with financial struggles, those that are, all different kinds of moments that we find ourselves in where we can find ourselves relating to the lyrics of this song of God, the noise of everything that's happening around me is getting so loud, I can barely hear you. Remind me that you're still here. Let me see that. And as I've watched the coverage and from the hurricane, as I've talked to different ones I know, friends all the way up into the Carolinas, and I've seen the reports of the devastation and the damage, and then I see those Christians that get on there and say, and here's the evidence of God. Here's where he was with us. One of the daughters of a lady that used to worship with us here before her death, her daughter lives up in the Carolinas, and she said after the storm was over, she walked outside and trees were down, and in her yard, a tree had fell to the east. It fell to the west, it was on her house. The neighbors across the street, the tree fell to the west. If it fell east, it had been on her house. And she said, I walked all around my neighborhood, and everywhere that I walked and looked, trees had fallen the right direction. Only minor damage done. She said, I can only attribute that to God in the midst of the chaos of the storm. And as all of that was working together, as I was trying to figure out what to talk about this morning, God brought me back to James chapter 1. I know we've studied this in the past, and this morning, for the most part, is just a reminder, but sometimes the reminder in the midst of the moment is what we need to hear God's voice saying, I'm still here. I'm with you. James chapter 1, verse 2. James writes, consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. James doesn't say if you face trials. He says when. There are going to be hurricanes. We live in Florida. There's going to be storms. There's going to be struggles of life because life continues to go on as long as God leaves this planet going around the sun. There's going to be times where we go through different difficulties, whether it's of health or whether it's of finances or whether it's relationships. There are going to be struggles and problems that are going to come at us. So James doesn't say if you face these things. He says when you face these things. But what he tells us is something that sounds so opposite of what we think it should be when he says, consider it pure joy. Wait a minute. Why am I supposed to think something bad happening in my life is a joyful moment? Well, what James is telling us and reminding us is there's a choice in this thing. And it goes back to the statement that I made earlier that when these problems come, we either find ourselves getting closer to God or we find ourselves drifting further away. We find ourselves getting closer to a place where we find hope and security, where we find relief from the storm, or we find ourselves sinking deeper into it. And the reality is that part of it comes back to a choice. Now, not necessarily a choice about the event itself, but a choice about how am I going to respond to the event. Do I choose to look for God? Do I choose to try to hear his voice? Do I try to see the things that are beginning to go on in my surroundings where I can find him and how he's trying to bring me through this? Or do I choose to only see the things that are trying to bring me misery? That are trying to harm me, they're trying to take me down that spiral towards a place that I really do not want to be. And as James is beginning this statement, consider it pure joy when you face these trials. It's just the beginning of a greater context that he's got for us here. But before we read the rest of it, he says, consider it pure joy. Nothing but. Don't give these events a single moment to be something other than, here is a moment for me to get closer to God. Don't let it begin to take root with the doubt. Don't let it begin to take control with the fear that this is something that is so overwhelming that I can never recover from it. God is there. God can help us through to the other side of these things. Each moment has its proper duration, its proper moment to accomplish something that Paul tells us. God says, I can always make this end up working out for something good. It doesn't seem like it in the moment sometimes. But if we go through it with him, we always come out the other side stronger. We always come out the other side in a better place than we were before. So how do I begin to make the choice to consider it joy? James continues, verse 3. He says, you can do this because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work in you so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Like so many things in life, sometimes we have to experience the opposite side of the coin to understand the other. Sometimes we go through a little bit of bad so that we better appreciate and understand the good. And would it be great if we didn't have to do that? Yeah. But there are those moments where we begin to take the good so for granted that, well, we need that eye opener. But James says, you know that when you go through these struggles, that if you come out the other side, you come out stronger for it. You develop more perseverance, the ability to withstand. I've shared before, one of the difficult moments in my life, and mine and my wife's life, was the birth of our two boys, both preemies. And as I've shared before, when Kevin was born, 2 months premature, 2 pounds, 13 ounces, we were scared to death. Didn't know which way to turn, sitting in a hospital room with him, alarms going off, scared to death that something was going wrong. It could have torn us apart. We chose to trust God to see us through. Little did we know that was preparation for when our second son was born, 3 months premature. at 2 pounds, 3 ounces, and was going to spend 3 months in the hospital. When we went through it that time, though, we weren't as scared. It should have been a scarier situation, but God had developed a greater perseverance with us by going through with Kevin, who actually only stayed in there a month. Everything went smooth and perfect as it could go with him. Wyatt was on and off the ventilators and all of that. But we were able to deal with it better because we'd been through the first storm with God. Since that point, we've been able to help some others who have started their walk through that same type of storm. One of the young lady on our prayer list, Frances, we're trying to begin working with her as she's going through this with a baby that's born at 23 weeks gestation. It's unbelievable what God is being able to do in their lives through the doctors, the nurses, those that are taking care, and what he's able to do because people can walk with him and say, we've been through this. Like each moment that we go through, our choice is to trust God. That's the one that leads us to the greater perseverance, so they're able to have more and more stuff come at us and still be able to survive it. It's able, knowing that I'm able to trust his plan. That when God tells me this is the steps to get through this moment of difficulty, I can trust that and walk with it and follow it, and it will lead me out the other side. The world has all kinds of advice about how to deal with problems. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always leave us in a better place. But time after time, if we look to God in these moments, we find it just works. James continues on, verse 5. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Now, let me pause here and say, I think specifically the wisdom that James is referring to in the short term here is the wisdom that when we go through trials, we need to consider joy, that it's the perseverance that it brings. If the understanding, the knowledge and the wisdom that if I go through this with God, it's going to be okay. That development of my faith, that strengthening of my ability to face what comes. And if I lack that knowledge, if I lack that wisdom, that understanding of being able to see what God is doing all around me, if like the song, I can barely hear your voice, God. The storm is raging so loud around me that I'm losing sight of who you are and of what you've done. I'm losing my faith in the midst of this. Go to him in prayer. God, I know that you say that you're there, but I'm having trouble seeing. I'm having trouble hearing at the moment. I need that reassurance. I need that confidence. God, raise your voice so that I can hear. Make yourself more visible so that I can see you in the moment, so that I can see what it is that you're trying to help do, what you're trying to accomplish in my life. James says, when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like the wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded, unstable in what they do. James says, keep enough confidence to go to God that you're confident he's going to answer. ask for those things that you know He's willing to do and willing to work in your life, and build that process so that you hear His voice more and more, and so that you see the things that He's doing around you. We were talking in Bible class this morning as we worked on our lesson of the Israelites crossing the Jordan River, going into the Promised Land, and talking about that the more that we strive to see God, the easier it becomes to see God in these things. There are a lot of people who have walked out in Kay's neighborhood there in North Carolina would have said, I just see a bunch of trees there. Why did she see the nature of the trees and fall in the right direction? Because she was looking for what God had done in the midst of the storm. It wasn't a random occurrence. It wasn't something that was just a 1 in a million chance that all these trees fell in different directions, despite being on the same street where the wind should have been blowing through in the same direction. But she was looking for God. She was seeking Him in the midst of the struggle that was going on. And when she did, she saw the presence of God. She could hear the whisper a little louder, I'm with you. And I know that you're hurting in this moment. I know that there's struggles. I know that there's things going on that seem like they're about to outweigh you. But no, it could have been worse. But my hand was with you. When I led our prayer for Bible class this morning, I mentioned what may sound like a strange statement, and I don't mean it to be. But I prayed about how relatively minor the death toll was. I realized if you lost a loved one in the storm, or you lost a friend or something, it's not minor to you. I understand that. But when I stop and think about the estimate, I think I saw of 2.6 million people affected by this storm between Florida and the Carolinas. And I think the death toll stands at about 65 or so, the last number I saw. That's a lot of death, but 2.6 million people affected by that, I wouldn't have shocked me if the number would have been a lot higher. And the answer is God is still working in this world. Death is a part of this world. We're going to have people that die from all sorts. There are going to be people that died of cancer. There are going to be people that died of disease. There are going to be people that die just because of natural deaths. There are going to be people that die because of storms. It's a part of the world that we live in, and the price that was set in place because of the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden. But God has made every step to help limit the impact of those deaths, especially since Jesus came. So to borrow a phrase that got popular over the last couple of years, faith over fear. Faith over fear is a statement that just says, it doesn't matter what Satan, it doesn't matter what the world throws at me. My trust in God is greater. My belief that God is going to see me through the moment, that He's going to put those in my life that need to be around me to help me in the moment, that He's going to provide in whatever way needs to be provided. Some of the lessons that we've had over the course of the last year and a half talked about how early God starts working on things. How so many times He's already started putting the answer to a prayer in place before the prayer has even been uttered, before we even knew the need. I don't know what all it was that God was putting in place before this storm went through. I guarantee you God had some things in place that are part of what made it not as bad as it could have been. It's bad in places. But what would have been if God hadn't had his hand of protection? Satan wants us scared. Satan wants us forgetting God. He wants us going the opposite direction. He wants us trusting the world. He wants us trusting the things that have proved time after time they don't hold up in the midst of the storm. God says, I'm here. Look towards me. Trust me. The psalmist wrote it this way, Psalms 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going both now and forevermore. That's the kind of confidence that we need to have in God. I don't know how each of you spent the night that the storm was going through. We wrote it out in our trailer. It wasn't as bad as they talked like it would be. Might have been worse than anyone I wrote it out before. Shay slept. Kevin slept. Wyatt and Savannah slept. I sat in the living room as long as power stayed on, watching the Weather Channel, watching it go past. I could have slept. I didn't because I wanted to be awake in case something did happen so that I would be alert and ready to do whatever needed to be done to get everybody else out safe. I share that because that's what God's doing with us. That's what the psalmist is talking about here. He watches over and will not slumber. You can sleep in peace, knowing God's watching. You can face whatever challenge the day throws at you because you know God is there to help you deal with it. Now, it doesn't always come in the form that we'd like it to. There were a lot of prayers that went up ahead of time asking that storm dissipate, that it go somewhere else, whatever. That wasn't the answer God chose to give us. But he's provided a lot of other answers and evidence in the process that he is there and helping us in the midst of the storm. And the reality is, if we'll look for it, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a hurricane or any of these other problems. We'll find him where he's always been, on our side, wanting what's best for us, trying to do what's best for us as much as we'll allow him to do. And the reality is that usually is the only thing that stands between God and success in our lives is whether we let him do or not. That comes back to that choice that I was talking about where James started. Do I choose to look for and find joy in the knowledge that God is with me and that He's going to take care of this? Or do I choose to take a different path? I had wanted to preach something exciting enough that maybe I did. But not exciting. Hopefully they'll lift it. But it is exciting that God's here. It is exciting and encouraging. I'm encouraged this morning because I'll be honest, I didn't know how many people were going to be here this morning. I know a lot still don't have power. A lot are still dealing with struggles. I thought there was a possibility it might be me and one or two others this morning. Got new faces here, people to meet and get to know. It's the reminder that God can be praised in the middle of the storm. And when it's all said and done, just as He calmed the waters when it was about to take down the boat with the disciples, we'll arrive at a point where He calms things down in our lives as well. We just walk with Him in the moment. As always, we want to extend an invitation this morning. And the reason is because God's always extending an invitation to us. The reminder that He's here, the reminder that He cares, the reminder that He wants to be a part of our life. If there's something we can assist you with in making that be a reality this morning, of helping you grow closer in your relationship with Him, let us know how we can assist with that as we stand together.